Instagram real quick, and then we'll kick it. Everything's good. Sounds good. Sounds great. 2 seconds. This will go.
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to sneeze again.
Go ahead.
Before we go. Kick it.
Go ahead. Sneeze it up.
I can't sneeze. I'm on the spot. Man, I'm excited for this one, man.
This is going to be good. Here we go. All right. We should be good. Good, go. All right, guys. We are back on the line with Bill Thompson from Spartan Forge. What's up, man? How are you?
Good, guys. How are you doing?
Good. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know it's the busy time of the year for all of us out there trying to kill whitetails, so.
It is. I'm just transitioning to whitetails right now. I've been chasing elk and antelope for most of September, but it's only my second year doing elk and antelope, and now I've transitioned. I'm just changing all of my gear right now to whitetail stuff, so I'm getting ready to go.
How was it for you? A lot of trials and tribulations?
Yeah, I mean, I was hunting. So with elk, I actually went out with Drew from Seek One like we did last year. Last year, I got on an elk and loosed the arrow right as he was about to take a step. Like it was like a 50-yard shot, which sounds like a long ways, but for an elk, I felt pretty good about it. And I was nailing my target at like 60, 65 yards. And I didn't think he had an idea that I was there, but just literally the second I loosed the arrow, he took a step. And like with an elk, those are 6-7 foot steps. So I went from being right in the lungs to hitting him in the front of his ass. And that elk, I tracked that elk for 3 days, and then someone else ended up killing it in an alfalfa field like 3 days later. And the guy sent me a picture of it. And then this year, I suppose I can talk about this now, but Spartan Forge, one of the things we're trying to do is increase people to get access and to get into areas. And in Montana, they've got this problem where the government will put 10,000 acres into public land, or a cattle rancher that owns 10,000 acres will get like a tax benefit to put the land into essentially open for hunting, and they call it like block management. And then there's other stuff where it becomes a WMA, whatever. But what happens is, when these things go into like a 5 or 10 year conservancy or something like that, then an outfitter will buy all of the properties that have roads around the land, and they'll block access. Then people can't get in there and hunt. And so what we did this year was we identified one, and I don't have anything against outfitters either, by the way. This isn't an outfitter problem. Like, I expect any businessman to make decisions that are good for their business. So it's not, for me, it's not a business problem. It's not an outfitter problem. It's a government problem. Like, if the government's going to use our tax money to open these lands, they should make sure that there's access to go along with it. But anyway, what we did was we flew into on a helicopter. We flew into a really large landlocked public area that was being outfitted. So people were paying $10,000, $15,000 to go in this area and hunt elk. So I was like, well, this won't stand. So let's run a helicopter and drop in. So we did that. But what happened was there were these wildfires to the northwest. So on the second day, or was it? Yeah, the second day. Like the first day we went out and located the elk and knew where we were going to go find them. And they're on this ridge and we were going to go kill them. The second day we woke up and you couldn't see like 150 yards. The smoke had gotten so bad. And then by the third day, the pilot was like, the fires could be moving your guys' way. If I don't come get you today, you're probably going to have to stay there until either the fires come and you have to get taken out by emergency services, or until the smoke clears and the area clears out. So we made a decision to leave. So we didn't get to hunt the rest of the time there, but I think we'll do something similar next year. And then I ended up going back to the same area because we ended up leaving, scouting some public, getting on elk. But then because we only had like 2 or 3 days, you really need 7 days if you're going into public and patterning elk and finding elk and getting on them. We only spent 3 days. We both got an elk. Drew got on like a massive elk. But then we had to leave by the time we were getting close. So I went back for an antelope hunt and killed my antelope on day 2. Actually killed like a Boone and Crockett, like 75 or 76-inch antelope, which is like a 170, 180-inch whitetail. Killed that antelope and then had 3 days. So I went back to that public, but they were getting hammered so hard and there were so many people there. Like every day, the parking lot for like the block management area that I was going to had like 7, 8 cars in it. And it was just, people just going nuts. So I was only there for 3 days, hunted for 2.5 of them and then left. So no kill this year either, but nature had a vote, and so now it's whitetail time.
That's awesome. Hey, it's still that must have been an absolute blast. I mean, there's no lack of that, right? I mean,
No, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
that's awesome. Well, let's kick this thing right into 4-wheel drive. We'll tell everybody who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about what you do.
Okay. So I'm Bill Thompson. Oh, everyone just dropped.
No, you're good. We did it on purpose.
Okay. My name is Bill Thompson. I spent 21, almost 22 years in the military. I was an intelligence officer. I started in signals intelligence and human intelligence, which is what it is. We can talk about that more if you want to later. And then I transitioned into doing AI and computer network operations. I did that for probably the last 12 years of my career, 10 years of my career, something like that. Retired. A lot of the work that I did involved, answering the mail for battlefield commanders on how to target and kill bad guys. I did that over, many deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, Southern Philippines, enabling targeting for battlefield commanders. And then while I was in the military, a lot of the tools that I was building and the platforms I was working on and kind of the mail that I was trying to answer for these battlefield commanders, I just saw an ability to graft a lot of this right onto whitetail hunting. Whitetail being kind of like my raison d'etre. Like my whitetail is everything for me. Like I do other things or whatever, but I'm always thinking about whitetail, no matter what I'm hunting or what I'm doing, or if I see a scrape somewhere or something, I'm immediately crazy for whitetail.
Can relate to that.
Yeah. And I've never kicked that bug. I've had that bug now for probably going on 20 years. So I started developing Spartan Forge and kind of started with just trying to make machine learning models that dealt with deer movement. And then from there was going to work with some of the bigger mapping companies. And my experience with the mapping companies in the beginning was kind of like either one, they didn't get what I was talking about. AI in 2015 to 2018 was kind of like not a lot of people knew what it was, or it was just like a science fiction term.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who did get it, one company in particular, just kind of wanted to lock me down. The contract that I had started negotiating had me like doing nothing else but this for 10 years, and then had like another 10 years where I had to do non-competes. And I basically told this company, I was like, look, the hard stuff that I'm doing is the AI. The easy stuff is the mapping. So, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not trying to sound like, cocky or arrogant, but as far as I was concerned, I'm like, you guys need me more than I need you. Like, and if you're not going to do a good deal where I can just focus on machine learning and building these products, then I'll just go build my own map. So that's how Spartan Forge started. 2.5 years ago. I just made the move with a couple other buddies of mine, 3 of us, and we started building the app and put the first, if I were to grade it, like the first like C- version of the app on the market 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. And today we're sitting on like a B- app, I would say. It's a thing with time where you just need more time to do everything that you want to do. But we're there now, and we've got an update happening next week where I think we're going to probably be moving from B- to A- or B+ territory. And I think by the time we're talking this time next year, we'll be in that A+ territory with all the stuff that we have coming out, and then just finding all of the data and all the private land stuff and everything that are kind of like the core pillars of what you would need in a planning and mapping application. Um, that's Spartan Forge in a nutshell. So that kind of brings us to where we are today.
No, and I think it's kind of cool. Is we've both now converted over to full time Spartan Forge, and I'll tell you what is like one of the things with it is like there's a lot of innovative things on there that a lot of other mapping things do not have, and it sets it apart in itself. Like um, seeing different things and using different things than other mapping apps have. Honestly,
Yeah, yeah. Would I interrupt someone? I'm sorry. I was going to
nope.
comment, but
No, I was just gonna backtrack a little bit if you don't mind. Can you explain like you talked about your former employment. How exactly did you use your time with the military and what you were doing with the military and fully flip that over to what you're doing with the app and basically patterning whitetails?
yeah. So in the military, there were two things I was doing. I was working with some programs where they were making essentially Spartan Forge like apps for our soldiers. So there's ones out there called like ATAC. There's chat interfaces through Blue Force Tracker that they use the military called like Merc and stuff like that. I advised and implemented tools and features for a lot of these programs. And like I said before, they're soldiers and hunters are trying to solve targeting problems, and applying rigor to the targeting process and identifying all the variables that feed into the equation of what makes a successful whitetail hunter or what makes a successful soldier. They're the same things. Just the data is different. So accounting for all of those data variables and conducting that multimodal and analysis that says like, if you want to kill a bad guy, you might figure out, where are his houses? Where does his girlfriend live? Where does his wife live? When does he go to his girlfriend's place? When is he at the gym? When is he doing this? When is he doing that? All of those things, whether or not we know it, when we make choices, we're reacting to our environment. So if one of my guys was, if a bad guy was in Africa, let's just say, and anytime it was below 60 degrees, he would go to the gym indoors. If it was above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, he was outside running. And anytime his wife was traveling for business, well, then he was at his girlfriend's house, or he'd go over there. And so you find out ways to distill that data and track it, and then you feed it to a machine, and the machine does that pattern of life analysis. And in AI, we call it recall, but it's basically the machine's ability to do prediction based on the variables that you're feeding to it. So the variables in this case would be weather, traveling itinerary of his wife, day of the week, predilections for food or when those restaurants might be open. Maybe it's his girlfriend's got a friend that she lives with, and so when that lady's traveling, then he's more likely to be over there. You take all of and there's more than that, but I'm trying to make this simple and understandable. But you identify as many types of data that you can feed to that target analysis package, and then you feed it to a machine and you automate it as much as possible. That means like getting camera data, closed circuit TV data, communication packages, observations, weather forecasts. Then you feed all that in there, and then you start to look at how the person acts in their day to day. Then you evaluate the efficacy of your model. How well does the model do this prediction? I did that work in the military in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa. And while I was doing that work, it occurred to me that whitetail hunters, in the same way, have a target, and whatever that target is, it could be, managing a herd and getting rid of old bucks. It could be improving your fawn recruitment rate by planting more food and having a particular size of property hold more deer by the abundance of forbs and vegetation that's on it. It could be with evaluating weather factors, understanding what weather factors imprint and graft themselves to movement metrics. For instance, humidity in the south in the southeast informs deer movement and is a predictor for deer movement, whereas In the Northeast, where you guys are, or in the Midwest, where it's cold, that it doesn't fall on the matrix. So getting collared deer GPS data as a source, kind of like putting a tracker on a bad guy's car, that deer is always wearing that collar. And then what you do with the machine is you feed all of that multimodal analysis to the machine, you clean it, you normalize the data, and then you draw meaningful conclusions based on the machine's ability to track and anticipate movement based on what it's seen in the past. Then you put it on a forecast in the future. And so when I was training these models in the military, you kind of determine a threshold where you can say the machine is actually doing prediction and it's doing it well. Then you assign a value. And if you've ever done statistics, you could call it like a p-value, or you could call it like a prediction value, or recall, amount of recall that's present. And then from there, you graph that same thought, those same methodologies onto deer. And then you say, what is the percentage of the time I have 6 buckets that I can put into evaluate deer movement? How well does the model pick the bucket that the deer movement's going to fall into? And then we have live data where we're getting data all the time from deer that are wearing radio collared tags that are constantly reporting back to base stations. So then we can actually take the data and like watch in real time to see how well the machine predicts. And so when we got successful at that, and we realized that there was efficacy, or that the model was performing correctly, we decided to take that and start with the first machine models.
Were you still like in the middle of your career when you started thinking that you could relate this to deer? Like,
yeah, I've been in the military for about 16 years. When I first started contacting biologists and colleges, and kind of pitching them on my ideas and eliciting data from these people. A lot of that took a lot of time. Like one biologist in particular I'm thinking of, who's become a good friend of mine, I talked to him for about 3 years before he let me get his first piece of data. And then I built him models for quite a while before he said I could use the data for my own models. So it involved process.
It's so wild.
It
makes
is.
so much sense though. Like it's the same thing basically.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so to me, once those models started to predict well, I kind of knew I had something there. But then, when I made that change from saying I'm just going to focus on machine learning to building an all-encompassing app, for ease of use, we call it a mapping application, but Spartan Forge really is a planning application. It's got in there, if people start to dig around, you get historical winds, you get weather. You can use the journal to look up past weather. You can look at the AI and prediction to see what movements can be happening in the future. You can research and see what type of food is in your area that deer are eating. You can go on the web app and use the Cyber Scout to understand anything you want about hunting or deer movement. And all of that large language model, Cyber Scout, is curated by us. We've got hundreds of thousands of training documents that inform that, based on first our collared GPS studies, but also other published science. And we only fill it with hard science. Like there's nothing in there where it's like, my uncle says when the water outside freezes, then that means this. Not saying that those things don't work, because some of those old rules are rules for a reason, because people observe things. And we're like a machine learning model is a pattern recognition model, and humans are pattern recognition models. So, but sometimes we don't understand. Like we'll say something, like we'll make an observation, and we'll be like, it always seems like X leads to X. And then we'll have a theory, we'll test the model, and we'll be like, yeah, it does. And we won't understand why X leads to X, but we know it happens. It's our pattern detection system. And we have 2 of them. Like we've got one in our limbic system, and then we've got one in our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex limbic pattern detection systems are easier to reckon, whereas the ones in our limbic system are not as easy to reckon. So a limbic system pattern would be like if you're outside and someone tosses a football your way and you don't recognize it, or you don't even know that a football is being thrown at you, you'll throw a hand up in front of your face to protect yourself before you even know a football has been thrown at you. Like you'll just automatically react and block the football. Or you've got, on your eye, on your retina, you've got a piece of your eye that's wired directly to your limbic system in your brain, where if you see a snake, you can jump before you recognize the snake. And so those are limbic system patterns that are very deeply ingrained in our biology, and they pattern detect. They detect pattern. Flying football is threat, block face. Like you don't want a concussion or to get hit in the nose. Snake is on the ground. You jump before you even realize there was a snake. Your wiring is acting so fast and it's so wired right to your spinal cord that those pattern detection systems we don't understand. Another one would be you feel cold and you get the shivers. That's a reaction to stimuli and then a pattern. And the pattern is you're going to get goosebumps because the goosebumps are conserving body heat. So you're reacting to that pattern even though you're not in control of it. And then a pattern that you might recognize is, my wife wears a certain type of colored dress, and boy, I freaking can't wait to get her home from dinner. That's a pattern you understand really clearly. Like she wears bright colors that look like fruit, and that does it for me. And that's a pattern you fully understand, and you see what it's doing to your body, and you react accordingly. So machines and neural networks are pattern detection systems. They just pick out patterns, whether it's images, behaviors, activities, weather. And then you can test to see how well you know what's informing the pattern by adding or removing variables.
So let me ask you this. So when you're plugging in all these, like you have to find all these data points to plug in because you're basically building an algorithm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine certain parts of the data probably hold more weight than others. Could you run us through some of the things that you found affect the algorithm the most? Like we all hear about barometric pressure and moon phases and temperatures. With your knowledge, what do you find holds the highest value when it comes to deer movement and predictability?
Well, I'll say some things that are obvious, but I think that are worth stating because I think they're so obvious we overlook them. The first one being deer are crepuscular animals, and they do most of their movement at day rise and day set. So when you map a deer, when you produce the bell curves of movement, no matter when the bell curve is, what time of year, the largest jumps in movement will be when the sun is rising and the sun is setting.
Mm-hmm.
So that is stable across deer and crepuscular ungulates writ large. That's the first thing. The second thing is obviously temperature. Temperature influences it. What people don't understand about temperature, or how I think people overlook it, and I'm not saying this as a wise ass hunter. I'm saying this as a data scientist.
Mm-hmm.
So people can say I'm full of BS or whatever. I'm happy to take them through the actual data. In fact, I think I'm going to do a podcast here pretty soon with Bo Martonic from East Meets West, where we're actually going to bring up the data and show the GPS spots and walk through it and actually show people what we're talking about here. Because I see other people doing it, and my problem as a biologist is not a data scientist, and a data scientist is not a biologist. I'm not a biologist. I can't say what, but it allows me to speak to the data in a way where I don't have any bias. Like
Right.
I haven't went to a school and been told what ungulates do. So I'm just simply looking at the data. Whereas I hear a lot of biologists go on podcasts and you can hear the bias.
Mm-hmm.
Like either it's because they advise for some company that's making some scent product, or they, do X, Y, or Z or whatever. And that's fine. Like I'm not judging anyone. All I'm saying is I speak to this empirically. So temperature would be another top one. But the way that I think people look at temperature, there's factors around temperature that you have to consider, and when you look at the data, make more sense. And one point of contact would be if you live in an area in the Midwest or the Northeast that's agricultural, and there's been a good crop, or there wasn't a lot of rain that didn't destroy crops, or there's plenty of growing and forbs, and the fields are full, and harvest is going to be good. then temperature dispersion doesn't matter as much as it would if crops were low that year and you had a high population of deer. So in other words, that's a part of our model. How well are crops in a certain area when we pull agricultural data from the USDA? Was there flooding in this area? The reason is because the deer aren't able to aggregate the amount of fat that they wanted come the cold season. So if they're carrying less fat, then temperature will have more of a bearing on movement. So,
not to cut you off real quick, but you talked about the crops and all that stuff. That would be the same as a bumper acorn year as well?
Yes, precisely.
A lot of acorns, a lot of food, a lot of fat.
Yes, and the earlier does will come into estrus. You'll have certain does in a herd that will traditionally come into estrus earlier than other does in the herd, and there's evolutionary underpinning for that. There's reasons for that. Those does will come into heat as much as 2 months earlier than other does in a herd. You'll see breeding data in September in an area where the peak of the rut is like November 4th. But
that's on years with more food.
That would be a help. Well, yes, they'll still come into estrus earlier than all the other deer, and they're usually older, wiser doe that know where the food is, know how to avoid getting killed, know, they're trained, you would say. And those deer will aggregate more body fat and generally will always have prime pickings on, the best bedding, group bedding that's near food, and they'll aggregate more fat, and then they will cycle earlier, and they'll also cycle more than once if they're not bred the first time, and the second cycle will be just as potent as the first cycle, and you'll see that explosion in early buck movement, and it might only last 2 or 3 days, but when you're examining data, you'll see like, wow, right around like September 15th, September 23rd, you see a spike in daytime buck movement. And then you'll see a GPS sensor for a doe and a GPS sensor for a buck in a singular area for like 36 hours. And then that buck has mated that doe, and then she's out of estrus now. And then the herd goes back to like an early summer, or late fall, summer, early fall feeding pattern. And then things return to normal in the deer woods.
That's wild.
That's crazy.
Where did most of your GPS data come from?
Well, now we have it from all over the U.S., but in the very beginning it was mostly the Southeast. Now we have a ton of Northeast data. We have live Northeast and live Midwest data. We've got data up and down the Midwest, all the way down into Texas. We've got Western Canada data, Eastern Canada data. We've got data from, I think there are 36 states that hold whitetails, maybe 32. And I think we have like 20 states of data.
Wow.
Now are you plugging, does all that data go into one algorithm, or are you itemizing like if I run a Spartan Forge in the Northeast, am I coming off of Northeast data, or are you just building one algorithm with everything?
All of the deer feed the model. Every white-tailed deer that we have feed the model. We prioritize how the machine processes the data, prioritizes data that's closer to where the model is where the prediction is being built for.
That's incredible.
So in other words, if we have a ton of Pennsylvania deer data. If your model in the Northeast, that PA data will be prioritized on how the model respects the efficacy of the data versus Texas data, where that model will still be fed, but it won't have near the weight that the data does in PA, if that makes sense.
That's funny because we actually just had a listener, Northern Atlantic Outdoors, said, Bill, you're giving me flashbacks of my economic classes. What is the biggest predictor in the deer movement in PA? Barometric pressure, low temperatures, ?
Temperature for PA is definitely one of those things. But again, so I say that, but I also say you shouldn't just react to cold temperature and say that's when hunting is going to happen. If you're trying to run your own model for yourself and not use like our neural network, here's I'll give you an example of how this breaks down and how this will make more sense. First off, the health of the deer herd has to be considered. Second off, you have to look at how many times there's been cold weather snaps already in that year. the first cold weather snap will influence movement in a way that's not predictable, especially when you're talking about trophy deer. When you're talking about, and what I mean by that is older deer. I don't count inches as trophies. I count age as trophies.
Mature.
This deer that I'm looking at right here, I killed last year, was 11 and a half years old. He was only 130 inches. But that deer, 3 years earlier, was 165 inches up in PA. Like that, to me, is one of my favorite deer I've ever killed and will ever kill. That deer is most likely to sit on his belly during the first cold snap and not leave much of his bedding area.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
A couple of reasons. They're pattern machines, just like we are, just like I explained before. But the pattern for a whitetail buck that is security minded, which they are, and doesn't like change, which none of us do, especially as we get older. Generally, they will know where the good food is, and they will have fat on their bodies no matter what's going on, no matter if crops were good or bad. Crops being good or bad generally affect a deer herd, but when you're talking about mature animals on the far end of a distribution, they know where the food's going to be. When it's getting to be year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10, they will find the food. And if they don't find, and if some other deer are on that food, they will push them off that food and they'll claim that food and they'll bed near it and it becomes theirs and they will get the fat on their bodies. When they have the fat on their bodies, and the first cold snap hits, that to them is like, your grandfather seeing a thunderstorm. He'll be like, well, I'm not going outside. Well, why? Because I don't know. Because there are people driving crazy on the road. There's lightning striking, flash floods. I don't like it. So grandpa stays at home. It's the same thing with these older deer. The first thing a drastic change happens in the deer woods, I see those bigger, older bucks sticking to their bedding areas for the first couple of times that this type of stuff happens. They just stick it, they stay at home, and they're like, I'm not going out there. All the other deer are going to be running crazy. They're going to be running all over the place, trying to get more food. You'll see general deer movement.
Right.
That
Yeah.
first snap will go up, but your big boys will be staying on their bellies. Now, how that changes is when it gets to be October and the food hasn't been available like it was before, and now we're talking about fat stores getting low. They actually have in their pancreas and their liver detection systems that indicate the amount of fat that's on their body. They'll react when fat starts getting lower. Then you will start seeing them participate with the rest of the deer herd and feeding and moving more when weather gets extreme. But depending on their health, their age, how tolerant they are of other deer, in other words, how much testosterone they have in their system, and the more testosterone, the more intolerant they are of other deer, until it becomes mating time. Then they're just on does the whole time. They just won't participate. So like that first few cold snaps, you'll be like, man, I went out and there were deer everywhere, but I didn't see my guy. You'll hear that story all the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But you also at the same time, we talked about earlier, like the old wise tales that's passed down from generation to generation. Oh, that first cold snap, you got to be out there, because deer are going to be moving, but you never hear anybody talk about that 1% deer that most of us are chasing. You don't see it.
And it may happen. And again, I encourage people who are listening to me, because I'm not trying to create hard and fast rules. I'm talking about observations. And of course, there's going to be times where someone's like, well, I killed my first big deer on the first cold snap. And it's like, yeah, I got you. I understand. What I'm talking about is, I think at this point we have something 100 plus mature whitetails that are 6 years or older wearing GPS collars. Right. I'm telling you what I see on the whole when I control for that age group, both does and bucks, and how they react to these extreme weather events.
Mm-hmm. It's a great population. It's not just specific, because that one mature deer is not always going to lift off of his bed. You know what I'm saying? There's that one off, right? And that's the one off that you see is when people say, "Oh yeah, well I did it. It happened to me."
Yeah.
And then they think that's rule, but that's not.
Oh rule. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you stories about that and rules, because one of the some of the collar GPS data that we have was from a hunting club that a friend of mine was a member of, and the hunting club allowed a university to come on and tag their deer at this hunting club. They had a low fence hunting club. so the deer came in and out. They were able to run. They provided food, but they had set stands that everyone could hunt, and you couldn't really hunt anywhere except for these set stands. And talking to my buddy's name was Dustin. Talking to my buddy Dustin, they had these hard and fast rules for like, oh, you're not going to see that guy over there on this day, or this buck here, and blah 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 blah. And there's two things that struck me from talking to those guys. The first one was there was a buck, and I've told this story on other podcasts, but I think it's worth mentioning. And again, I also feel like it's worth mentioning. These aren't hard and fast rules, and there's no hard and fast rules. That's probably the biggest thing about deer that I would tell people is, especially when they get older, they're individuals. They have their own personalities. They have their own predilections, and they really only should be compared to themselves. Like you shouldn't like if you have a group of 5-6-year-old bucks that are 150 inches plus, I would tell you you have 5 individuals. And I would say just learn the one you're trying to hunt. Don't try to find a rule for all of them because you're going to get lost in the sauce. But essentially, they had a buck on this property that they called the Traveler, and he only showed up. What the story or how this went was, he only showed up during the rut. We would see him on cameras every once in a while in September, October. And then we'd see him once or twice daylighting during the rut. He didn't live on the property. He was like 165, 170 inches, massive whitetail. Everyone, wanted to figure out where his home range was. Nobody ever saw him on the hoof. And they ended up finding his body on a hillside, a rock hillside, had his GPS collar on him. These GPS collars were not radio collars, so you couldn't get the data till the animal was dead. So the animal died, had the collar. He was on this hillside. This was a large rock hillside that was on the property where they found him, where this was, right? Now, mind you, again, they called this deer the Traveler. The GPS collar is pulled. We do analysis on the GPS collar. Not only did that deer live on that property, his home bedding area was on this rocky hill, where nobody hunted. There was no stands near it. It was like 4 acres or something. I don't remember what it was. It was small. That was his core area. All of his daylight GPS, when you plotted all of his daylight movement, it was all within this 4-acre area, and it was within 200 yards of most of their stands. That buck just never left that area during the daylight hours.
What state was this again?
The state where this was is North Carolina.
Okay.
Well, that's crazy because you hear about a lot of these guys that are chasing, big mature bucks like Lee from Seek One, and he'll find these bucks in these nitty gritty, tiny little core areas because that's where they feel safe, and you have to go above and beyond and out of the norm to find these deer where they feel safe, and if he feels safe there, he's going to go there. And especially with them stands being the way that they are, they're going to, he knows that those stands are there and he's smart,
Well, that's the second part that was crazy about the story that I was going to tell you guys. Most of his daylight movement, he was scent checking stands. He was scent checking this was like a German short-haired pointer, like perfectly trained, knew exactly what to do. His daylight movement, he would sense stands, and then the few times that they would see him on daylight cameras, he would hook a stand, and then he would go into feed and check the does. And then they got their daylight picture, and then he was gone. So this guy knew exactly where all of the stands were on this property. He had figured his way out that he was going to walk throughout that property, and all of those guys couldn't believe it when we showed them the data. They were like, "There's no way that he lived there." And they're like, well, and then you ask him, it's like, well, why did you say that? I was like, nothing would live on that hill. There was no food there. There was nothing there. It's just all rocks and
steep, pretty steep.
Yeah, very steep.
Yeah.
And I said, that's exactly when he was there. And you guys never went there. You guys never spent time in there. You were never there. And maybe he didn't eat much during the night or during the day. I'm sorry. And then did all of his traveling and eating at night. Lots of interesting stuff when you actually look at the data and you kind of like pull it back and you see how these animals, I equate them with trained dogs. Like I have German short hairs. My third one here has been walking in and out. I spend a lot of time training my dogs. I know how to train them, how to incentivize them. And you can get them to do wild things with just punishment and reward. Like my dog, train him to unlock a door from the inside if I lock myself out of the house. You can train these dogs to do amazing things. When you have an animal in the wild like a buck, and you're using the same stands, and you're going in and out on the same trails, and you check the same cameras, and you feed the same stands or the same feeders, you're just training them. You're showing him exactly how the game is played and the restrictions, and you know, that's why you always hear the story about the kid who goes like they let some 8-year-old or 10-year-old like, oh, he's coming to the hunting club for the first time. It's like, well, where are we gonna stick little Billy?
Yep.
Put him on that hill where we never hunt, where we never see any deer, or that we blah 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 blah. And then the kid shoots a 140-inch buck or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like public land. The kid that's just learning how to hunt, he goes right outside of the parking lot and shoots a 140 where nobody hunts, but that buck is watching everybody else come in and out of the parking lot, come down the trail. I mean, they're watching you constantly and learning you every single move that you make. There's a reason why. I mean, they're not stupid. They're not dumb by any means.
Yeah, I call it trained. You know, they're been like a dog. They're trained. Like if every time a dog, you can train a dog to bark all the time. You can train it to never bark. It's just incentivizing it one way or the other, and they train very well. So yeah, it's interesting, and I've got 15 stories like that about deer data that would just blow your mind.
That's crazy.
So I got a question I've been dying to ask. Moon phase.
Yeah.
It's been a hot topic lately. I've been playing with my own algorithms lately, and I'd like to hear your unbiased, what you've seen just from crunching the numbers. Like, is there a correlation? Is there not a correlation? Or what are you seeing with deer movement and moon phases?
Okay, so the first thing is I haven't looked at deer movement in probably 2 years. We've gathered a lot of data since then, so I need to revisit it. The last time I looked at it, though, we probably have 60 or 70% amount of the data that we have now. The last time I looked at deer movement as it correlates with deer data, there were two things. The first thing is, by and large, the amount of light that the moon is reflecting at night, in other words, if it's cloudy or not cloudy, seems to affect deer recognition, recognizing the transition from night to day, and they may feed or stay in feeding areas longer than they normally would during a full moon because of the brightness of the moon. I think, and this is a theory, this is not a for sure thing, and I'm not standing by this. I would not die on this hill. I think the brightness of the moon can affect the photosensors in their eyes, and they might think that it's either night longer, or that it's less obvious the transition between night and day. So they may stay in food longer, which gets them to bed later, and it seems to get them moving later in the day after they've bedded. That's the first thing. The second thing about it is there does, on some studies, not all of them, I'm thinking of 3, and I think they were all in the southeast. Maybe one was in the northeast. I would have to go back and look. This is not I did not find this in the Midwest. I found this in the southeast and in the northeast, I believe. There does seem to be more bedding changes during daylight hours during a full moon period, or like, when there's a full moon, it seems like they're just a little more restless. So they're like a buck might get up and change beds, depending again on the personality, between 5 and 10 times, sometimes up to 20 times, during daylight hours. So in their core area where they feel safe and they're living, they'll get up, pee, poop, maybe work a branch or hit a scrape or something in their area, bed back down, but they're in their core area. Every deer is different, but the amount of times will increase 20 or 30%, it seems, during the daylight movement and amount of bedding changes that happens during full moon cycles, if that makes sense. But that's not everywhere. I have not seen that in the Midwest as much as I've seen it in like the Southeast. For sure it's a thing in the Southeast. I think it's a thing in the Northeast. But again, it's not something where I've sat and labored over the data for days. I can tell you that generally, on the list of things that influence deer movement regionally, the moon and the moon phases and waning gibbous, waxing gibbous, all of those things are a factor, but they're at the bottom of the list generally.
Really?
Mm.
Okay.
It's not that they're not important. Again, like don't
Right.
the fact that they're on the list means that they can contribute in one way or another. All I'm saying is if you were to tell me to pick the top 3 things for Connecticut in deer movement, I would say outside of crepuscular hours and outside of normal deer movement distribution, I would say temperature, barometric pressure, and cloud cover is a big one.
That's interesting. I like that though.
Cloud cover influences thermal generation in a way that I don't think hunters think about. And it influences where deer are willing to move and when they're willing to move there, because bucks, especially bigger and older ones, smarter ones, won't move into certain areas unless they know they're getting firm thermal generation and that they can smell what's rising on the heat and what's coming down with the prevailing wind.
So I want to make sure I understand this right. So clouds are good or bad for deer movement? You want less clouds, right?
It depends. Okay. I mean, that's for you to understand what areas are you hunting. In other words, people will say, I see a buck in an area on certain types of weather patterns. Like when there's a northwest wind, I tend to see this buck at this field or this area or that type of thing. And they just think about the field, but they don't think about the bedding situation and why that wind is favorable for that buck to make it from his bed to that field, and then what's in between there. So it could be, and I'm going to run a hypothetical, it could be on that northwest wind, he uses a drainage and he rides the top of that drainage, so he's getting that northwest wind, but he's riding the top of that drainage because he wants to smell maybe there are does in the bottom of that drainage. So not only does he want that north to west wind, he wants a northwest wind that's only at 3 or 5 miles an hour. That's not overweighing those, because if you get above that, then the thermals get pushed.
Right.
So what he wants is 3 to 5 miles an hour, where he's got thermal rise in the morning, or thermal drop in the evening, and he'll take the bottom of the drainage. And he wants to be able to detect thermals. He wants that northwest wind, and he wants the visibility that the lack of cloud cover gives, but also that encourages the sunlight to hit that hill. It's the thermal generation. So because you think about it, if this is say that this is a ridge right here. You're looking at my arm. I'm sorry if people are only hearing me, but you're looking at my arm. You've got does that bed on a hillside. Okay, they bed along this hillside. Are you guys tracking me? Is this making sense?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
This buck is bedded back at my shoulder, and he's walking to you guys on the screen. If the sun is rising in this east and it's warming up this hill, the buck doesn't have to go and bother these does. If the wind is coming over like this, he's just going to walk the top of this hill, and he's going to smell everything in the bottom with thermals. He's going to detect everything from this way with the prevailing wind, and he's going to see everything in front of him, and he knows where he's coming from. So now he feels very safe traveling this route because he's got thermal generation, he's got prevailing wind, and he's got movement. So if there's not thermal generation on a particular day, either because the wind is crazy or it's from a weird direction and now he can't sense things coming, like maybe thermals and wind are working together, so now he's only getting thermals here, he might get to that ridge and be like, I'm not going to travel that ridge today because I don't know what is happening on this top side because I can't hear. Or I can't smell. So those are all factors whenever you're, especially in mountain country or hill country, that people, if there's, and not everyone needs to think about this. I'm speaking to the psychos right now. I'm speaking to the guys like myself.
Yeah.
I'm talking about people, the same types of guys that recognize offices in football and say, this is why they're running this defense, and here's the 3-4, and Peyton walks to the line, and he checks down and calls an audible. Talk about those guys. When you're hunting that 160, 170 inch deer, I promise you that those deer, if they're pressured, are thinking about those things and considering those things before they walk certain paths. They're not just walking down the path. they look into these things, because when you plot it, and then like one of the features that we're coming out with soon on Spartan, that's too long in the making, it should be next week, will be our solar flex layer. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to say, I want to know in this area where sunlight touches the ground all day long. So when you have that information and it's September, you know where the bucks are going to be avoiding because they don't want to be too hot. When
Right.
it's December, you know where the bucks are going to be bedding because they want to be warm. But also, another way that people should use that layer is they should light up a hillside, and when they've seen a buck on a camera, go back to the Spartan Forge app, bring that day up, look at the prevailing wind, look at the ridge that he's traveling, and understand how he's using thermals and wind to navigate that area. And then note that, and then journal it in the Spartan Forge app, or write it down. You don't need my app. Write it down in an engineering handbook or something and say, saw him here on this day. There was good thermal generation from this bottom. He was walking with this predominant wind. The wind was at this direction and this velocity, and he walked through there. And then wait for those situations to present themselves again, and then make a move. And so these are the types of things that I don't know, the psychos. That, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that these are hard and fast rules either, but I am saying there's definitely correlation. Correlation is not causation. Another statistical inference that I'm hitting you guys with. Just because something correlates doesn't mean it's the cause. There could be 5 other things contributing to that, but it's our role as pattern detection systems to try to disassemble and figure out those, or disassemble those things, break them down, understand the pattern, and then set ourselves up for success, so that your stand that you're choosing, your location, is methodical, and it's got a rhyme or a reason, so that you're not driving yourself nuts and saying, well, the last time I saw this buck on a camera, it was a northwest wind and it was 28 degrees and he was here 3 days in a row. Now it happened again and it didn't happen. Well, what's different this time? How did you enter that drainage? What time did you enter that drainage? Were the thermals rising or the thermals falling? A lot of areas I won't hunt until the thermals start to rise. I'll go in and say, okay, the hillside's been heated up now for about 15 minutes. Thermals are rising. Now it's time for me to make my move on this buck that's bedded on a point where I'm going in, and I need the thermals to rise, and I need there to be less wind, so that my thermals will take the thermals will take my scent out, and now I can set up over this buck's bed. So that and those days to pick those, and you're really hunting those big bucks, would be a day where it might start windy. So the day starts windy. So the buck's picking bedding for windy, because that's all. He doesn't have a forecast because it's windy. He's picking a day for windy, and he's picking a day for windy with thermals. So what do you have to your advantage? Well, you know, when you're looking at your Spartan Forge app with the hour-by-hour wind, or you're looking at weather.com, that the wind is going to calm down when the sun comes up at 9:30 a.m. or whatever, and now you've got an advantage. He picked the bed for wind, and the wind is dying down, and now thermals are generated. So now you can get into his bedding area and select a tree that's above him, where normally if that wind were still there, he would have the advantage, but now that advantage is gone.
And he's more likely to move beds on that switch anyway.
For sure.
When the wind changed, he picked his bed for the windy condition. The wind dies. Now he goes, oh shit, I need to move to a better location now.
And you just nailed the best predictor for mature buck movement is a change in cloud cover or wind direction.
Okay, so I wanted to
midday change.
Yeah, dive into cloud coverage a little more, because this doesn't get talked about much at all, and
it affects the amount of thermal pull or thermal push.
Oh, more cover or less cover?
Well, I mean, if a buck is using a particular area because there will be thermal generation, and say it was clear, or that the bedding gets chosen when it's clear because of thermal generation. If it's extremely cloudy and windy, there will not be much thermal generation. So
it's the change one way or the other.
Yes, and they'll go and select either different bedding or they'll move to the predominant wind. But that wind change on buck bedding is the #1 prediction. They're not going to be moving far. They might be like at the end of a point, right? So like this is a point off of a ridge. And you might have set up for and I'm going to move it. You might have set up to bed on this side because the wind's going like this and he's getting thermals from down here. That wind switches, he might only move to the other side of that points.
Right.
But that's all you need, because what you need to be doing is setting up here above or below, depending on the time of day. If it's the morning, you would want to set up high.
Hi.
If it's the evening, you'd want to set up down low.
Whoa.
When you know that wind change is happening, you're going to see that buck move. They will move.
Yeah, I've seen it once before with my eyes, and I was like, no shit. The wind shifted, and he got up and moved.
That's what happened. That's wild.
That is wild.
Bill, can you go through some of the other features of the app? Because like LiDAR and all these other, things that you offer on your app that others do not.
LiDAR layer is one of them. I think one of the most valuable things that probably gets overlooked by people, or certainly it's what I like the most, is we have like presets on a car radio. We have preset maps. So you have, they start as like preset 1, 2, and 3 when you open the app. You go in there and you configure your maps. I configure my maps for an aerial display, a LiDAR display, and then a traditional topo display. Topo display gives me the roads, it gives me the national parks, it gives me all that crap. I do a LiDAR display, generally with no topo lines, with slope angle, and maybe public land or private land or something like that. Then I'll do an aerial display where I will throw topo lines on there, and I might do slope angle, probably not. And I'll do private, public, timber cut, and agriculture. So those are like my 3 maps that I select. And then in the 3-line menu, you can turn on your compass swiper. Then you can swipe quickly between those 3 maps and look at, throw it into 3D, whatever you have to do. Look at those things very quickly. Whereas in other mapping apps where there's, one map instantiation, it might take you 15 minutes to switch between all of those things and look at all of those different representations to get a full view of what you're looking at. And then when we throw in the sun flux that's coming in there, the solar flux that I talked about, and then next week we're dropping 1 meter to 30 centimeter historical for all of the US. So the entire US on Sat1, there'll be a little clock in the corner of Sat1. When you go to the Sat1 map, just like you do if you've looked on UAV, how it's got dates at the bottom, Sat1 will have dates. It starts with 3 and 4 years of historical, and then later we'll go to 6 years, and then later we'll go to 10 years. But in that Sat1, you'll be able to flip the years at the bottom and look at different years over time. And that's helpful for identifying the age of cuts, identifying how the land has changed maybe after a flood or a development, or land gets cleared, whatever you want to do, evaluating the age of a forest cut, whatever you want to do with it. There'll be this historical imagery data that comes out next week, but we have historical data in UAV layer for 48% of the US. And that goes every 6 months back to, up to 10 years. So we'll do that in Sat1. We have this chip system. Instead of scrolling through tons and tons of different layers, it's just all represented with chips. There's a public land chip, there's an agricultural chip, there's a private land, there's a slope angle chip, there's going to be the solar flux chip, there's going to be, you can select different topo lines for depending on where you are. You can do 10 foot, 15 foot, 25 foot topo lines. Or I'm sorry, 10 foot, 20 foot, 25 foot topo lines. You can do all of that configuration there, and then you have those maps ready to swipe through. We have a journaling feature that allows you to look at historical weather. So if you're patterning a buck and you look at the days that he shows up, you can take a picture of that, snapshot it, in your whatever your app is, make a journal entry, put the date and time on there. It'll go back and pull the weather and the wind direction, and then you've got that journal entry for that animal.
Can you go back and add a journal entry in the past?
Yes.
Or does it have to be current?
No. You can reprogram the date, and it'll go back and pull that old weather, and then place it in the journal entry. We have Blue Force Tracker, which is just you draw a geofence. You get on the mapping app, you draw a geofence around an area. I invite you guys via email or a rally code. And then when we're inside of that geometry and dropping pins, we auto share the pins, we auto share the notes, we auto share the photos on those pins inside of that area. In the next update, you'll be able to auto share location when you go inside of there if you want to. So if you're hunting with kids, or you're doing a deer drive, or you're hunting with your grandfather and you want to know where he is on stand, you'll be able to chat with him through the app, and you'll be able to see the other people's battery and service. So you're tracking other people inside of that geometry, just inside the geometry. When they leave the geometry, you're not sharing with people anymore.
That's cool.
Get out of here. You can't see my pins no more.
Yeah, get out of my pins.
But if you're scouting like public together or a property,
Yeah.
cross share pins, take pictures of scrapes, of tree stand setups. You can put in codes for gates, all of that type of stuff. And it all gets shared in there. And then you can add people, they get to see it. You can kick them off. You can change the leader. You can do all of that stuff now. Beyond that, we have, I talked about the historical weather. I talked about our artificial intelligence to predict deer movement. I talked about in the Intel tab, there's photos for what types of plants get eaten in that area, what the deer gravitate towards, what the buck to doe ratio is in for the area, what the Boone and Crockett records are, the largest tracts of public, breaks it down by weapon platform on what has been killed where. All of that stuff is in that Intel tab. And then you go to...
I'm missing so many things.
Yeah, you click that Intel tab.
Well, I didn't know
when you
about
click the Intel tab, there are 3 tabs inside of there. And then it has the historical wind that's represented in a polar plot. And there's a compass on the main screen. On the compass on the main screen, a lot of people don't know this, so I'll just say it.
This was my question.
The compass on the main screen does a bunch of things.
Yeah, it's so awesome. It's right there.
Yeah, so the goal with that compass, it was actually based on something that I helped build in the military was, and I call it an e-tool. But it's meant to do most of the functions of the app, so you can just do them with your thumb. So the first thing you can do is you can long hold on that compass, and you can drag it to either side of the screen. So if you're right-handed or left-handed, or your phone's in your right-handed pocket, and you want to use your right side with your thumb, you can move it.
Steve's playing with it right now.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. The second thing
Come
is
on.
when you look at the compass visually, you can push the center on me button. If you push the center on me button again, it will tilt the map.
Yeah.
And then north will orient, and it will show you which way the map's oriented relative to north. And you can push the center on me button again, or the north up button, and it shifts it back to north. And then the third thing that you can do with it is in the 3-line menu, you turn the switch and you can swipe through maps. You can also turn that off. So if your thumb's inadvertently hitting it, you can turn it off, and then you're not switching maps with that thumb between your presets. The fourth thing that you can do with it is you can click it once, and then you get a radial display of all of your tools. So you can start a track, you can drop a pin, you can initiate a measuring tool. There's a fourth thing. Oh, you can turn on or turn off the 3D maps. And then you can also emphasize the terrain of the 3D maps inside of that radial display. You click it again, those tools go away. The fifth thing that you can do with it is you can double click that compass. And when you double click that compass, it will drop a pin in the middle of the screen. So if you're walking into the woods in the middle of the dark and you see a scrape or a new rub, you just center on me, double click the compass, and when you get to the stand, you can fill in the information or the stuff that you saw there. And in an update in December, you can triple click the compass, and when you hold your camera up, it will auto snap a photo, and it will attach the photo to the pin and then drop the pin on the ground.
I got one question about that whole compass. So you have the compass, and then you have a blue like
wind.
But as you move across the map, it changes sometimes in the wind direction, right? Like wherever the pin is, it does the wind direction.
Wherever the crosshairs are on the map, it's telling you what the wind is for that area.
Mind blowing. Because like when you're in an area, right? Because I could be at my house, right? And you're like, all right, so it's northeast, and then I started scrolling over, and I like clicked to like one of my stands, and the wind's completely shifted. I'm like, whoa, no way, that's wild. Because like, does it take into consideration like different hilly terrains and stuff like that, or is it just the predominant?
At this time it's just doing what the National Weather Service and our provider app are reporting for in the area. But what we are doing is we're building a wind layer currently that could be done before the end of season. But the wind layer will illustrate thermals. And
that was my question. Yeah,
it will show thermals.
That's gonna help a lot of people out.
It will show how they interact with wind. We're 80% of the way there on that.
And I know this is a crazy question, and you can tell me to shut up. But are you going to be able to make it so that you can view it on your dashboard for like Apple Play?
Yeah, we're good. We'll get there. I hope to have that done over the summer.
So
We're
so
gonna
that's
do stuff. We're gonna do stuff with that Apple Play and with the Android Play that you guys are not thinking about, and nobody else is thinking
okay.
about.
Good.
And I don't use this term lightly, but it's game changing. What I'm doing with that thing, you guys are gonna be like, I can't believe I never thought about doing it this way. It's gonna change shit.
I mean, the shit that you've already done, there's no doubt with your statement that you said.
But it's so like when we get into some of the big woods up north and stuff. I run that thing right. It's just easier on the dashboard. You know what I'm saying? You're driving,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, there's a cut in there,
Yeah.
there's a cut in there, there's this, there's that. You know what I'm saying? We use it
Yep.
moose shed hunting
Road
and like
turkey
road
season.
scouting. Yeah, it'll be a game changer. I
I
can't
do
wait.
want to backtrack a little. There's a ton of things, Bill, that, in my opinion, set you apart from your competition. Two of them, one of them being LiDAR and one of them being the UAV. Can you dive into the LiDAR a little bit more? I find myself using it probably more than any other mapping or map. How do you use it, and what kind of things are you looking for in the LiDAR feature?
Yeah, so with LiDAR, light detection and ranging, it works like a radar. So when a cop's hitting you with a radar gun, it's bouncing an electronic pulse. The electronic pulse comes back. They measure the shift in the velocity of the electronic pulse. They can tell how fast you're going. It's the same thing with LiDAR. It bounces light out of a sensor. The light comes back. It penetrates canopy. It penetrates trees. It's just showing you the ground. The things that I look in there for are undulations in the Earth's surface or changes in small micro changes of the Earth's surface that will drive movement. Chief among them being like rock formations that you can't see through the trees that will drive movement. Rock formations that are on points that bucks might bed below or above. And then the other thing is trail systems that are either natural or artificial. So whether that's from cows or from elk or from deer making trails, they will choose and reclaim trails made from logging operations, made from old roads, made from changes in the ground. And when you see, really for me, the biggest thing I do with it is, especially in like the big woods of like Pennsylvania, I'll look for where many of these logging roads come together. And then if the logging operation is quite old, the deer will have reclaimed those trails. Almost 9 times out of 10, when you see 3 or 4 of those roads coming together on like a big hillside, a massive hillside, and it's been reclaimed, or in other words, everything's growing back, the deer are still using those trails. There'll always be a scrape in the middle of that spoke. There'll always be rub lines along those roads where deer are making their way, and I always scout for scrapes, and a lot of those get overlooked, and you wouldn't know that all of those roads lead there unless you walk all 10,000 acres of that mountainside. So those are the main ways that I do it. There are other things that I do with it, but those are the big things that I do with it.
I'll tell you one thing that's huge. We talk about it on the podcast a lot. In the Northeast, we have stone walls through all our woods, and it's a big structure feature in the middle of the hardwoods. And you really need a really good leaf off aerial photo to see stone walls. Your UAV is great for it. But even with that, you'll lose stone walls through the trees. Like maybe it goes over terrain feature or whatever, but you turn that LiDAR on, man, those stone walls jump out. You can see breaks in the stone walls. You can see inside corners, outside corners, and like it just lights those stone walls up throughout the entire woods.
Yeah, and then if you throw slope angle over it, it should make them pop even more.
Okay. I haven't looked in. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yep.
That's absolutely awesome. Is there any features that we're missing that maybe you want to drop and let anybody know about?
I mean, I think the most overlooked feature, well, solar flux is going to be huge and contributing to this when solar flux comes out. Right now, on the web app, there's a split screen setup that I think people would benefit a lot from using. I do LiDAR on one side and I do leaf off imagery on the other side. And it allows you to look at 2 different maps in the same areas, and you break it down that way. The Cyber Scout, the people who use it use it a ton. The people who haven't discovered it yet or just haven't messed around with it, go and mess with that thing. It will change your life. I mean, the Cyber Scout on the web
This is not the app. This is on the desktop.
On the web, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go on the Cyber Scout and ask it a question. I used it last year to teach me how to do a brain tan deer hide. It'll show you how to do intersection and resection. It'll show you how to build a gun rack out of deer hooves. It'll show you how to use the LiDAR feature in the app. It'll tell you how to interpret a polar plot. It'll tell you anything you need to know about the deer woods or outdoors.
Wow.
And we spent a lot of time on that. And like I said, during the season, people don't use it as much. It's more of an off-season thing when people are trying to learn. But the people who use it, like there's this, we plot the usage line. People don't know about it. People don't know about it. They look at it. They might use it a little bit. And then all of a sudden their usage goes through the roof. The people who start using it use it all the time. I would say that's overlooked on the web. Eagle Eye is a new feature that's on the web as well. You can take that UAV imagery and you can tilt the camera to 45-degree angles, and then you can see rock formations, rock walls from different aspects. That's another thing where people don't really understand its value until they actually start using it. Go ahead.
Is it something that will that ever be available on the app, or can it not be?
No, it will be. It's just we got to get there.
Yeah.
Everything that's on the web, including split screen, will at some point be on the mobile app. On the mobile, the biggest, most overlooked two things that people don't use, but every killer that I know that uses my app, and I know a bunch of killers that use my app, the most used features are the historical wind feature, the polar plot that shows you the prevailing winds, especially when scouting in the off season, because I'll look at that polar plot and say, in November, 63% of the time it's a southwest wind. So when they're scouting features, they're keeping that southwest wind in mind when they're looking at scrapes and understanding that they're doing their post-season analysis in March when the leaves are still off the trees. That's probably the most prolifically used feature. But like, we've got a guy in our pro staff named Andy May. He is the most underrated deer hunter in the world. We've got Lee. He's one of the best deer hunters in the world. He uses that prolifically. And then the other thing that they both use, that all killers that I know use, including guys like Johnny Stewart, Drew Carroll, Lee Ellis, Levi Morgan, is the journal feature. All of their journals are filled up to the brim.
Do you go in there and take a look at them and just like learn a little bit?
They would show me if I asked them. But
you got to get inside the Geo Circle to read their journal.
Yeah, I mean, those guys have between 200 and 500 journal entries. Every time they get a big picture of a buck on a camera, they take their phone up, and we'll automate this to make it easier. But for now, they take their phone up, they snap a picture of it, or they screenshot it. They go to the journal app, they put the time and the date in the journal app, they add the photo in there, they crop it, and then they make a journal entry.
That's awesome.
And then you can hide those journal entries. But then when you hide them so they're not a pin on the map. And then you can look at those journal entries and you can start to understand, oh, this deer is showing up on a northwest wind when it's sunny and in the morning. And then they start to backwards plan from that. And those are like for all of the sexy features that we have, those are the foundational features that most users never even interact with, which are common among our best hunters.
Makes sense.
Well, it's time to get on over and sign up. You're missing out.
And if you guys don't have an account, or people that you work with don't have an account, I'll give you my phone number when we're done here. Just text me your emails. I'll set you guys up with free accounts. And you guys can take a look at the paid features. And, I'm happy to come back on and do another podcast with you where we use the web feature, the desktop feature, where I spend most of my time when I'm scouting. It's mostly on the desktop. And through how to use some of this stuff. And
yeah, we definitely could do that too. That's definite.
Can I put in one? Can I get a couple more presets? Like maybe 2 more, like 5 maybe.
I talked to my guys about that. We'll probably do it where you can hit like a little plus button and set up as many as you want.
Just a couple, but those are awesome. Being able to just swipe up and run through your 3 presets, it's saves so much time. You can just run through them and right back again. But I always find myself wishing I had 1 or 2 more presets.
Well, we can do that. That's too easy.
Hey, Bill, before we let you go, man, we've definitely learned a lot, and we'll definitely have you back on. We got one last question we ask everybody, and that is, what drives you outdoors, Bill?
What drives me outdoors, I would say, is primarily, this isn't going to be the sexy answer you want to hear. I mean,
that's okay.
My wife and I always talk about this, and people always talk to me, or I get to know someone in the beginning, and they think like, Bill's an extrovert, or Bill can really talk, or he really seems to shine in these moments. And that's kind of a skill that I've learned. It's not my precondition. Like my recharge time, my time to gather myself and my thoughts and to reflect or to be in nature or to spend time with God, that for me happens on a tree stand. Um, and I'm an introvert in that I recharge when I'm alone and with my thoughts. Um, that I would say that's the primary thing. So even if I lived in an area where there aren't a lot of deer, I wouldn't expect success all the time, or I wouldn't expect to see big bucks. I would still be seeking nature and the outdoors for that recharge, that centering that I get from being outside. The second thing that gets me outside is while I was in the military, planning combat operations, conducting signals intelligence operations, doing combat operations, piecing together the intelligence framework to help, a combatant commander or a badass, Delta guy or a special forces guy go and kill a bad guy. Um, the feeling that I get from that, the heightened sense of things when I'm participating in a combat operation or I'm watching the pieces get put together and then witnessing victory, or we just killed or arrested a guy that put a roadside bomb that killed 15 Marines last week and now he's dead and in the ground. There's a heightened sense of things that I get from that that I've never been able to recreate. It's a buzz. It's like someone might get it when they win like a school championship in football or something. Or, like you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing for the right reasons. And there's this synchronicity that takes place where everything has come together and you're in the moment that you can need to be in. And it might come from evolution or our ancestors when they were chasing mastodons, right? Because those guys needed to exist to kill so the tribe could eat. But there's this thing where it all comes together. The only other place that I've been able to get even a bit of that is when I put it all together on a big buck or on an old doe even, or I've put the pieces together and isolated the variables and it's all come together. And now it's just me and a buck and a string, in the middle of some place where no one would ever think to see this animal or whatever. And then when the string comes back and the world washes away and I'm watching that arrow get loosed and it leads to meat on the table or deer chili for my daughters, or, like these crazy animals up on the wall here. That heightened sense of things I only get recreated in the deer woods. And it's the closest thing probably now that I'm an old man that I'll ever get back to combat. And I get that in the deer woods as well. Third on that list would just be, and I kind of mentioned it, is I don't get much more joy than when my daughters are like, "Are we getting deer chili tonight?" Like that to me, I love that too. And then the fourth and last thing I'll mention is in a couple of weeks I'll be going up to deer camp with some of my closest friends, guys like Johnny Stewart, Lee Ellis will be coming out there. He's getting married in a few months, so we'll be up there in the deer woods. Everyone's chasing bucks, everyone's bullshitting, making fun of each other in camp. Johnny's got a hot tub. We'll drink some beers. There'll be deer on the pole. We're telling old stories. Bo Martonic and his dad Joe will show up, and we're all celebrating each other on our victories. Everybody is there to watch everyone else succeed. Like I even get a bigger high when I recorded Johnny killing a buck last year, where I had killed my buck on like the third day, so I hunted with him. I got to be on stand with him when he killed a buck. And then the camaraderie that happens and everything that happens around that and the getting together with other guys. And the world for 5 or 6 days becomes a very simple place where you are genuinely invested in the betterment of the people around you. And you're, it's a very tribal feeling that is a good feeling that it can't be recreated anywhere else. Those would be my reasons for why I do this and why I'm so passionate about it.
I'll tell you what, Bill. This is episode 266, I think, Steve, and that is the number one most sexiest answer that we've gotten on what drives you outdoors, Bill.
And he started by saying, like, this isn't going to be a sexy answer, but let me just spit this on you.
Well, I meant that about the recharge part.
Yeah.
Because the clarity in the recharge, like,
Yeah.
I feel like even if I'm dog shit tired by the end, when I'm heading home to my wife, I feel I have a renewed vigor. I have a renewed sense of myself, and I understand again why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I'm placing so much time and effort into this project. It all becomes crystal clear to me.
Absolutely. Well, tell everybody where they can find your project and kind of really dive into this, because I think, we finally made the switch and I'm not looking back. I mean, it's insane. But
SpartanForge.ai is the website. I on Instagram and Facebook, I answer all of the messages as the CEO. It's very important to me that I'm dealing one-on-one with a customer. So I spend between 2 and 3 hours every morning responding to messages, talking to people, understanding what they like or don't like about the app. The content like this that we generate and the podcasts and the filming in the woods and stuff is on YouTube. The how-tos for the app, transferring pins from other apps, all of that stuff is on our YouTube. The culture, what we're trying to do for veterans. We're doing stuff out in North Carolina, helping with flood relief. They can find and donate to Save Our Allies. We're doing that through our Instagram. That's the best way to get a hold of me, and I answer all of those messages. So if you got something for me, hit me up there, and I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you, Bill. We really appreciate you jumping on, man, and taking the time away from the family and the deer woods to do this with us. And we really look forward to doing it again and really kind of diving in and showing guys how to use the app fully. So
God bless you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Bill, thank you for your service, buddy.
Hey, thanks for your
thank you. And for everybody else, thanks for taking the ride right here on the Outdoor Drive.